a strong work ethic that through it you develop a visual language over decades and decades, which becomes a foundation to what it is you do in your creative vision.
Our podcast today features Bruce Winslow at his artist talk here at the Saginaw Art Museum Gardens. This was recorded live on November 6th. The talk by Winslow is in support of the current exhibition, The Art of B.B. Winslow, The Restlessness in Me, on display at the museum through January 18, 2025. Listen in here and plan to visit and see the work in person.
Well, I got way too much information for you guys tonight, so, but I am very humbled to be here at this powerful opportunity that it gives me. I had always hoped that maybe that this might happen, and I reach out to the staff that made it happen, Michael Colas and Ben Champagne and Thor Rasmussen and Kim, the preparator, and the ladies at the front desk. They all made it a very enjoyable experience for me. So, I don't want to be too formal, but they asked me to talk about my art. Well, if you've been doing art for almost 50 years, there's a lot to say. And so I'm going to have to just kind of go through and pick and choose what I want to say, what I think represents what the material is about. You know, what the show is called Restlessness in Me. Or is it a meditation? Or is it self-imposed belief structures that make you do this? But I feel that if you look at the work that we do, it's really a very akin to being a responsibility that we assume as an artist. A responsibility to live up to that day that you made an audacious declaration that I'm an artist. Oh, hey, who says? You know, it's kind of a self-proclamation to develop an individual identity and an obligation to the virtues of creating. Honing down your characteristics, you'll see that there's a lot of similar characteristics and mannerisms that work from work to work to work, and qualities and mannerisms. Emotions, of course, are the glue that holds it all together. And then you have to have an intelligence for composition. I mean, I'll get into that in a little bit. But as I said in my opening remarks at the reception, the bottom line is a powerful determination to have a work ethic. You know, a strong work ethic that through it you develop a visual language over decades and decades, which becomes a foundation to what it is you do in your creative vision. But it comes down to a work ethic, and half the time when I go down to the studio to work, maybe 80% of the time I really don't want to. It's my responsibility. And it was the most important gift my Depression-era parents instilled in me, a work ethic. And without it, to be a successful artist, it won't happen without a work ethic. Kandinsky, the great abstractionist, spoke deeply about the responsibility of an artist. He said, "It is very important for the artist to gauge his position right, to realize that he has a duty to the art and to himself, that he's not a king of a castle, but rather a servant to a more noble purpose. He must search deeply into his soul, develop it, tend it, so that his art has something to clothe and does not remain a glove without a hand." He also said, "The artist has a triple responsibility to non-artists. He must repay the talent which he has, that's one, and two, his deeds and his feelings and thoughts, as those of every man, create a spiritual atmosphere that surrounds us, which is either pure or it's poisonous." And number three, these deeds and thoughts are the materials for his creations, which themselves exercise influence on the spiritual atmosphere. The artist is not only a king because he has great power, but also because he has great duties. So how do you define what's undefinable? The impossible worlds that the surrealists created allowed me both to escape from realism and embrace abstract art. In abstraction and surrealism, I embrace the absence of reason or logic, where there are no laws, no rules, and no expectations. It became an open-ended universe for me to create a new reality. This is kind of a hard one to follow, but abstract art does not imitate reality. We all know that. But it is real in it and of its own self. I ask, is abstract art perhaps more real than imitative depictions of the real world, which we call realism? That which we call realism is really an illusion of reality. Abstraction is not an illusion of reality. It is genuinely real on its own accord, of its own laws and its own rules of actuality. Something that I think is important to understand about my painting is the concept of improvisation. Responding expressively in the moment without preconception. In an automatic response to emotion and psychology and the inclinations of the soul. The improvisational approach to painting is much the same as the way a musician improvises during an unwritten, unplanned saxophone solo or a lead guitar solo in rock or the blues. Improvisation, responding in the moment. Another important thing about my paintings is that they are gestural. They are action paintings. And I prefer to use the term mark making. Expressionistic influences, this is all expressionism, move my work toward automatic mark making of aggressive brushwork, strategically planned high-key colors, rhythmic gestures, varying textures, activity, and motion, markings that heighten the energy of a growing image. To create an image where the eye cannot rest, ever moving, like reading sentences, all exploding with the true character of action painting. Now, another thing that's important to these is that my use of poured pigments, solvents, and varnishes, which is pretty untraditional. Paul Jenkins was a master of poured materials. Poured. I'll say for the record that I discovered my technique of pouring and flowing pigments and solvents and varnishes before I knew about Paul Jenkins. But once I learned of him, I had found a kindred spirit against which I could measure my discoveries and accomplishments. Jenkins' fame is in his use of the process of controlled paint pouring and canvas manipulation with veils of lush, transparent, and translucent color. He once says, I tried to paint like a crap shooter throwing dice, utilizing past experience and my knowledge of the odds. It's a big gamble, and that's why I love it. Nice statement, I thought. So here we are, we're pouring solvents and pouring varnishes into wet oil pigment. And using gravity, I tilt it this way, I tilt it that way, flowing color, often as much as I brush pigment. Celebrating the improvisational happenstance and manipulating it. Experimenting with a strategic use of high gloss against satin, against matte surfaces. And certainly music has been tied to my art over the years. I'm as much a musician as I am a painter. And it's a wonderful melding of expressive vehicles. Painting is a solitary, quiet, contemplative behavior. Performing music is a social, outward, and rather aggressive behavior. Painting leaves a physical form of permanence behind an object. While music is abstract in nature, it has no object. Music fades into the air, becoming a memory. Yet it can exist in your mind, even to hear it silently. That song you can think, that one that keeps you awake at night, yet it has no physical form. Kandinsky knew of the synergy between art and music, and it was partially because of his capability to imagine sound as color. He said, "Color is the keyboard. The eyes are the hammers. The soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key, then another to cause vibration in the soul." He wrote, "In music, a light blue is like a flute, a darker blue a cello, and still darker a thunderous double bass. White has the harmony of silence, like pauses in music that break temporarily the melody. Not a dead silence, but one pregnant with possibilities. A totally dead silence, on the other hand, a silence with no possibilities, has the inner harmony of black. In music, it is represented by one of the most profound and final pauses, after which any continuation of the melody seems the dawn of another world. The intensification of yellow increases its painful shrillness. In music, red is the sound of trumpets, strong and harsh and ringing. Violet in music is like an English horn, or the deep notes of a wood instrument like the bassoon." He went on like this. Isn't it wonderful? And then, of course, there were a couple movements in the first quarter of the 20th century called Orphism and Synchronism. They were early abstract movements in the first quarter of the 20th century that often referenced the relationship between music and art, especially the musicality of color. They believed that colors could be orchestrated in the same way, in the same harmonious way that a composer arranges notes in a symphony. So color and art have these wonderful correlations. And to me, my music are musical, about lyricism. Lyricism, the definition of it. About harmonies, about passages, symphonies, and orchestrations. Taking all these individual influences and mannerisms and themes and elements, one has amassed a visual language that is personal. One must orchestrate and arrange the language and influences into a resolved statement. That is the ultimate work of a painter, the final resolution of all one's influences and mannerisms. And on the subject of resolution, I'm going to move this along. My paintings in their early state are very rough and imperfect. Merely a random distribution of lines and shapes and colors collected in an automatic, haphazard, and thoughtless way. In that way, they are perfectly honest, collected by chance, unencumbered by thought or reason or function. When it is time, my charge is to orchestrate that chaos. People always ask, do you have an idea what the painting will look like, what it will be? I do not. The painting grows from webs of chaos of their initial markings, mark making, and colors. I paint multiple canvases at a time. Some in the late stages of completion, other in their infancy as recipients of the random marks of improvisation. And from that chaos, the paintings essentially tell me what to do with them. I do not come to them with a concrete intention. The great abstract surrealist professor of aesthetics, Paul Klee, stated, "The painter should not paint what he sees, but what will be seen. Art does not reproduce what we see, rather, it makes us see. Art does not reproduce the visible, rather, it makes visible. Color is the place where our brain and the universe meet. One eye sees, one eye feels." To resolve a painting, I compose and I arrange and I organize all of the chaos of the elements and effects collected marks. My charge is to ultimately purify their compound imperfections, areas that continually call out to my eye to be changed, obliterated, purified, and resolved. During this process, sometimes I'm the artist, and sometimes I'm a participant. I am learning what artwork might become. Well, in that interpretation, the true definition of being an artist is to resolve a picture, is knowing when to stop fussing. Understanding when the painting is done is the definition of being an artist. Let it go. Cut it loose. Well, we pull artworks from our being, and once they are created, we sign them, hold them up, move on to the next. But what about that painting? You have birthed it. It is a lone being, a point of arrival in time, and it has a life of its own ahead. Much of that life is likely in darkness, standing face to back in a dark, damp basement storage rack among dozens and dozens of other orphans blind to the world. Hidden from sight, such an unbelievable irony. The great abstractionist Mark Rothko stated, "A picture lives by companionship, expanding and quickening in the eyes of a sensitive observer. And it dies by the same token. It is therefore risky to send a painting out into the world. How often it must be impaired by the eyes of the unfeeling and the cruelty of the impotent." Well, all this calls out what makes up my art. Rothko put it best by saying, "There's no such thing as a good painting about nothing." Now, all this said and done, I started years ago with a search to understand what is infinity. Because that's what they are. They're like looking in the sky or into the heavens. Certainly seeking to understand infinity, to create a visual limitlessness, to create a potential vision of heaven. And 20 years later, I was dumbfounded when in 1990, the first Hubble Space Telescope photographs were revealed. I found that for a decade, I had very accurately formulated an abstract vision of what infinity might look like. How the hell did I do that? I grew up on Haley Street. In the outermost reaches of the universe, the Hubble documented expanding space as it is, as man always ventured to see. We now have seen beyond into the reaches of the universe, eclipsing conventional understanding of time, light years beyond, and my vision of infinity had been startlingly accurate vision of the infinity of the universe. So we've touched on my belief structures that shape my responsibility as an artist. All this discussion amounts to the foundation of my aesthetic and my visual language, and my belief is that one's aesthetic determines one's legitimacy, and one's legitimacy hopefully affirms his authenticity. So that's pretty much the show. But I'd like to do an experience here that I've never tried before. And you walk around and you see what the title is of all the things. And you say, well, where did he come up with that title? Well, I carry a journal all the time. And as I read or I watch a movie or I listen to a song or I have a conversation or any point of verbal communication that we experience, and I make long lists of themes that interest me or words that strike me. And I use them both to title my paintings and to write music. And so I create these long lists of themes in my journals. And one day I started saying, oh, well, what if I just read? Because these all come, one will be Friday, one will be next week. So they are unrelated to each other, but they're related to what I feel and think about art and songwriting. I'd just like to read one of my lists and see what you think. Is it a poem? I don't know. A truism. Taking chaos back into order. The beginning of wisdom. Things I do in secret to be empowered, to be transformed. The path of life. Your grace is enough. Remember your people, remember your children. Covered in your love. Widen your hearts forevermore. That otherness. Wonderful, wandering, wondering. Alone with myself. A reason to hope. A deal I made with myself. I dream that I'm dreaming. Spontaneous enthusiasm. Acting on impulses. Unanswered questions. The midst of becoming. Some inner peace. Mirrors of heaven. Candles of hope. Birthed insights. Secrets inside me. And being self-aware enough to realize. Peace. I appreciate you folks coming tonight. I'm happy to take questions or walk around and talk to you about specific works or whatever. And we're here just to enjoy enjoyment.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of the titles. There's quite a few that
Yeah.
Some that were not. I don't think they were all not.
No, and it goes on forever. I mean, I got decades of that stuff.
I come up with the guys too. Sometimes I feel interesting. I write it down too. That's what you do when you're an artist, huh?
Yeah.
Mine are different though. I was really yours are so great. Mine are very minutia related.
Yeah, I don't know how I would describe that, but this life is so undefinable. How in hell did this group of people end up with the miraculous experience of living on the only goddamn planet we know? How did we get so lucky about that? And so that's where the grandeur comes. I just try to define, well, how enormous is this miracle? that we have. And to that, it just talks grandeur to me. And then when you have paintings that look to infinity and to the heavens and to sweeten waking up in a day. Right.
A lot of the things you referenced were 20th century abstractionists, but I know you've said another big read on this work is like 18th and 17th century frescoes.
Right.
It looks like
yes,
abstract versions of Italian religious things.
Yeah, I was very, very inspired by Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, and he did some of the most grand Rococo and Baroque ceiling paintings where he'd paint the building away and it would be images of little angels and cupids and again, looking to the infinity of atmosphere. And so there's a great many of Renaissance and Baroque painters that inspired me to kind of take my paintings and look at them this way, which is pretty cool. And I don't know many guys that do that. Yes, ma'am.
You studied youth a lot, and you were talking about how you were doing stuff. I mean, I watched the DVD where you do the.
Yeah. The majority of my painting is on my knees with the canvas laying on the floor.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, I'll work in nice oil, wet oil pigment, like all through here. And then when I got enough generally roughed in, then I'll bring in varnishes and paint thinners and let it pour into that wet pigment, and these rivers start to form. And that's real, the organic side of it. Organic, like smoke, like river and water, or like clouds, or like steam, against hard edge geometry, which is the opposite of organic. You know, geometry is based in math and man-made, but these rivers of glory along in here are organic and atmospheric. Two opposites in life as far as matter goes, and yet I paint them together where the geometry structures the organic, and the geometry doesn't win, the organic doesn't win, the atmospheric doesn't win. It's a battle where they both complement each other. And so that's kind of where that all comes about, you know? So, yes, you're on the floor, and I'll take a beer can and I'll tilt it this way, and for about an hour, it'll flow that way, and I'll say, I don't want it to go into that section. And so I'll take that can and I'll come over here, I'll hoist it there, and it'll start going this way. And you just start managing the traffic of all this organic movement. And, you know, sometimes I'll pour some down and let her start flowing, and I'll go out and watch a football game. Come back in a half hour or an hour. Oh, I got to move that. That's coming too far to that piece, that part that I love. So I'll tilt it that way. And I'll go up and watch the next quarter, come down. Okay, that's got to be changed. And I'm going to put a little bit more solvent in there because I want it to flow further. And so it's kind of like, well, I talked at great length about improvisation. Let that happy accident occur. But you can't create it. You can't predict it. I told you I never know what a painting's going to look like. So it's painting from a distance kind of a thing. You allow gravity to do its job, and temperature affects it. If it's real cold in the basement, my basement is real cold, that'll slow it all down, you know. So, yeah, they're done on the floor.
What kind of music do you play?
I play pretty much everything, you know, rock, country, blues, folk, and I play acoustic guitar, I play electric guitar, I play bass, I play saxophone, piano, and so it's, I'm lucky.
You know, when you were talking about painting is silent, being music is soulful, do you ever play music when you paint?
Not playing.
No.
Yes, I do play music. Yes, not all the time. I'm not. I know a lot of people are very dependent on that. But a lot of times I paint in silence. But you know, if I know I'm going to be down there for 2-3 hours, I'll say, oh, let's put on something. And again, it's all over the place. Sometimes I could put on a jazz thing. Sometimes I'll put on Dean Martin. You know.
Do you happen to notice that it changes the way you view something or paint something?
I'm not conscious of that. I'm sure it affects the mood. I know there's one painting I did that's called Layla because Derek and the Dominoes was playing, and you know that part at the end of Layla. And it was so glorious at that moment in time. I said, Layla. And Eric Clapton didn't write the ending of Layla. Jim Gordon and Rita Coolidge wrote that ending. Never got credit for it. But
When did you first know that you might be an artist?
well, I got sent to Central Michigan by some wealthy relatives whose son was just like my brother, and he was a musician too. And they wanted me to go, and I didn't want to go to college. I didn't know why I would go to college. I worked in a hardware store and worked at Dow Corning Corporation for a while. But eventually I went over there and I didn't know what my major would even be. So I got all my requirements done. And then I had to have some electives. And so I took some drawing classes. I always loved the coloring book and all that, you know. And suddenly I started finding purpose in this painting business and drawing. And then one day I painted the painting that's on the other side of that wall right there. And the painting painted itself. And in it is really an encyclopedia of the visual language I've done ever since. And that was in 1978. 1978, I started thinking, man, I might declare a major here. And I fell in love with art history. Then when I really, really knew is I was taking a class in aesthetics with a sculptor named Vito Kolbitz at Central Michigan. And the end project of this, he was teaching us a lot about performance art and unorthodox manners of expressing. And so I got kind of into that idea. And so one day for this final project, I gave him an invitation. I said, you need to be at this spot out in the country in the woods at this time or someone could be hurt. So I went out there about an hour before he's coming, and it had snowed all night. And I took my roommate with me, and we went out in the woods, I would say 75 yards or more. And I had him dig a hole. And he dug a hole and kind of left, here's the back, there was a seat down to the bottom of the hole. And I sat in that hole, and I had him cover me with the dirt up to here. And I had built a styrofoam sculpture covered with plaster. And it had a box on the bottom. It was kind of a geometric form. And I had him put that box over my head. And I told him, you go on, go home. And so the instructor came, and he, and this, 20 minutes later, While I'm breathing, the dirt starts impacting. I'm under there, and I gave him a poem to read and a pencil and some paper to make a nice improvisational drawing. And I says, when you're done, there's a bottle of wine there for you. But when you're done, then I want you to tilt this sculpture back almost like it's on a hinge. And there's my head sticking out of the ground. And I said to him, can you help me? That's what we did. And all the way home, after he dug me out of the ground, I had fits of laughter I've never felt before.
I believe that.
I just went, oh, holy fuck, what did you just do? He kept that and used it in a book he was writing as an example of performance art. So that's when I said, dead ringer, I'm an artist. I had already suspected I was an artist, but that was the day I made that audacious proclamation that I am an artist. And that's why you have to maintain your responsibility for your saying that you're an artist. You can't say that and not be responsible. And so that's where the work ethic comes in.
Well, I want to ask you about that too. You said about 80% of the time you don't want to go down to the studio.
I'm not, yeah.
Can I ask, when is the time when you start getting excited then? When you get down there?
Oh yeah, you get down there and you get your gloves on and you squeeze all the oils out and it's a mess and it stinks. But then I look at, okay, what are we going to do tonight? You're going to respond to all this chaos of gestural marks that were kind of unconsciously applied, and so you got this mess. That's a good example. The kind of chaos that's there. But then you go in and you start looking, okay, what's working here and what ain't? I don't like this area down here because it's dark. It's too dark. And this here needs more red. And this over here, it's kind of muddy. And so you start purifying those areas, cleaning them up, the purification, working towards what I said, the point of resolve, where I look at it and nothing bothers me anymore. That's clean, that's right. That's a nice piece of texture and a beautiful red. I don't see anything else that bothers me in this painting. All done. Utterance. All done. And another thing I didn't tell you is that, being an artist isn't all about painting or creating. There's a stretcher under here. I have to then stretch the canvas after building the stretcher. Then I have to prime that canvas 3 times. And then I need to paint the damn thing. And then when it's done painting, you've been through all that process I just was talking about and all these considerations I've talked about, then you have to cut the formal frames. You have to sand them. You have to put 3 coats of varnish on them. You have to assemble them and then put them on the painting. So it's really a job. Jesus was a great teacher and spiritual leader, but he grew up as a carpenter, And so it's as much carpenter work and mundane varnishing and finishing and everything. Then all of a sudden you put the frame on and you go, oh. Yeah. So it's been an exciting life, and again, coupled with being a musical and being a songwriter, and I do a lot of recording, and I've been pretty blessed to have these 2 things that are so unconventional for a kid that grew up on Haley Street. It's just, why me, Lord? And Chris Crawfordson just died here recently. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Temple Arts Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the podcast and making a donation to the arts through SaginawArtMuseum.org or TempleTheater.com. This will allow us to continue to bring enriching program to Saginaw and beyond.